Have you ever
Oh.
considered rest?
Sounds familiar. Doesn't seem like fun though. I'm out.
It You might want to look it up. I'm just thinking out loud on this one. It is not like an Italian appetizer of some kind.
No? It does
No.
sound like one. Like after your aperitif, you can
Have
have your resto.
a resti if you're getting fancy.
Well, I mean, it's pretty clear from my shirt and my general demeanor that I am quite fancy.
It's what everybody says.
Hello, alleged human, and welcome to the Chaos Lover podcast. My name is Ned, and I'm definitely not a robot. I'm a real human person who desires rest and quiet and a lack of activity. With me is Chris, who is also here. I didn't have a good bit. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I don't have one either, actually.
Wow. Wow,
Um,
it's come to this, huh?
how is your fill in the blank with thing that I don't care about?
Oh, quite good, and thank you so much for
I'm
asking.
glad. Is that how this works?
Yeah, we can go with that.
I've communicated with humans before.
Did you notice that my background is sparser than usual?
I noticed it's darker.
It is that too. It's not actually darker. Well, it is a little bit darker. I could turn my fancy lights on. But it more has to do with me adjusting the white balance on my camera.
Oh, you finally learned that you can do that.
You hush.
I'm helping.
I'm I'm working on a new course, well, a revision of an existing course for Pluralsight, and they now want people to do instructors to do face to camera is what they call it. I call it video, but they want people to do that. And so if you want to do it, you have to get your setup approved. And their feedback was one, you have too much crap behind you and you need less. And number two was your white balance doesn't match the lighting. So you have to fix that.
Number one feels a little subjective / rude. I don't disagree. I'm just thinking out loud.
Yeah, it has to be non-distracting, and apparently I had too many things that were distracting behind me. People would be like, "Ooh, what's that?" And
They
so
pay
I
too
had
much
to
attention to the flea circus.
I mean, they do get a little out of hand sometimes. When they're jumping through the fire hoops, I could see how it would be difficult to focus on learning about Vault.
Right. Especially that one time that Lorelai got set on fire. Like that was almost a tragedy.
I mean, almost. I'm so glad that they managed to put her out with the thimble full of water.
Look, that's what it's there for, man. That's what it's there for.
Safety first. Safety in numbers. So many numbers. Let's talk about some tech garbage, shall we?
Okay.
Um, well, we had a listener request that we share some of our stories from the trenches. And since neither of us has ever actually been in a war zone, let alone a trench, I'm not sure what they were looking for, Chris.
I've been in a trench before.
Is it one you dug yourself?
Well, I mean, not like just all by myself. I was part of a group, a very
Sure you
friendly
were.
group that all dressed alike and were there. Actually, I feel like I've already said too much.
I'm not saying cult because I would never call the Boy Scouts a cult.
Look, man, they don't even have cookies. What's the point?
They
Think
have
about it.
popcorn and it's
That's
not good.
bro,
What?
bro.
What?
I can't even with the popcorn right now. What are you doing?
I
I
love
thought this was a
popcorn.
serious podcast.
What have you been listening to for the last 3 years? Guy and his freaking cookies. I love popcorn, but not the popcorn that the Boy Scouts sell. Pick something else. Donuts. Sell me donuts.
I can do that. $85.
Done. I will buy $85 worth of donuts. What is that, like half a donut? I don't know. Inflation's out of control.
You just give me your credit card and I'll take care of it.
feel like that's gotten me in trouble before. But I like donuts. Let's do this thing. So I thought that we could share some stories of disaster recovery, perhaps disaster recovery disasters, if you will. I certainly have my fair share of disaster recovery exercises that I was part of, and not all of them went well. You?
Accurate, similar. I'm pretty sure that's the rule. Do you remember that one time a company had a DR plan and it went perfectly, no notes?
Yeah, no. Just not a thing. But there's different levels, right, of how poorly it can go,
Right.
and I've seen it go about as poorly as it can. Would you like to start, or you want me to start?
So, I mean, I can start actually before disaster recovery tests.
Mm.
There is such a thing as having a disaster without a recovery plan.
That that seems like the worst kind of disaster recovery.
You get, back in the SME days, you would get a phone call at 1 o'clock in the morning, emergency, customer, absolutely panicking. Everything is broken and we don't know how to fix it.
Mhm.
Do you have any more information for me, sir? No. Okay.
Right.
This is a lot to go on. Thank you for the heads up, sir. So I've had this happen a couple of times, actually. The first time, way back when I was still young and had hope for the world.
So when you were 5?
it was it was a glorious nap. No, I worked for a university that had an unplanned outage.
Mm.
Now, here's the fun thing about this. They were supposed to be backed up to the gills so that power would at least stay up even if power in the city went down. They had dual feeds from Pico.
Mhm.
Good sign, right? Promising.
Yep. Good start.
They also had a backup battery system.
Mhm.
I want to say it was supposed to be rated for 110 minutes,
Okay.
which I
That's
mean, we're
ample.
talking early 2000s. That's a lot of car batteries.
Yeah.
And honestly, spoiler alert, if you ever look at your backup system, that's all it is a shitload of car batteries.
Have you ever been to the SunGuard facility in down in Philly?
Yeah, I'm not allowed to talk about it, of course.
Well, they have a battery room, and when you walk past it, it just looks like a field of car batteries all linked together. Just like hundreds of car batteries, and that's
Mhm.
their like battery room. And that's
Yeah.
when I realized, oh, that's what's inside those big metal boxes. It's just lead acid batteries.
Now, I'm sure that as time has gone by, the technology has advanced, but I'm also pretty sure not by a lot.
What?
Anyway,
Eh.
this particular disaster had no disaster recovery plan. So basically, we walked in to an empty building with all the lights out. So this was a I can't remember if it was a brownout or a blackout. It was a citywide incident, whatever it was. And it completely caked like many zip codes.
Right.
Also, a fun takeaway maybe you should have disaster recovery in a different zip code.
It's a thought.
So we were trying to figure out what in the world was going on. And the call went out. So the third thing that they have after the batteries was a diesel generator.
Mhm. Yep.
Now, here's the thing about diesel generators, they don't run all the time. They sit there and wait to
Mhm.
be needed
Yes.
because otherwise, that would be a waste of a lot of diesel.
True. Mhm.
So we get into the room and we're trying to figure out why nothing works. Why is the batteries not powering the room? Mind you, we're doing this by flashlight
Mhm.
because the entire building is out. Long story short, we never had to turn on the diesel generator. Would you like to know why?
'Cause it had no diesel?
Because somebody pushed the whole room emergency shutoff in a panic to get out of the room, thinking it was going to break the man trap magnets,
Oh,
which meant that even the power from the battery backup stopped going to the servers.
yeah.
So there were a number of takeaways from this incident.
One would imagine, yes.
First question: was it a good idea to have the battery power run through that whole room emergency kill switch in the first place? Now, if you think about it, this is not an easy question to answer.
Mhm.
Let's say there's an electrical fire, or there's a reason that you want all of the power to be able to be pulled or killed from one place immediately. There's a use case for that.
Yeah. That's immediately what my mind meant to is, there's a fire in the server room, I need to cut off the power.
All
How
of
do
the
I do
power.
that?
Right.
All of the power, hit the big button. It would be bad if I hit the big button and instead the battery backups kicked in and kept power going to the electric fire.
Right. Incidentally, not really disaster recovery or computer related, but if you have some type of power generation in your house, you have to be connected to the Pico all power kill network for similar reasons.
Mm,
If
okay.
Pico is working on wires and expects all the power to be out,
Mhm.
and your solar system or whatever you have is still sending power into the grid, you could kill somebody.
That seems bad.
Yeah,
Yep.
not ideal.
No.
So there's absolutely a reason to have a when in emergency kill all power switch.
Yes.
Was it necessary to have that directly next to the door though?
Probably not. Or at least there should have been another more obvious button for an emergency open of the door.
Right. Also, everybody that has access to that room should have been trained and actually practiced leaving the room in a hurry so that you have the muscle memory to push the right button and not push every button you can find.
I think you raise an interesting point because typically when we think of disaster recovery, we are thinking of all of the technical things you need to do to bring your systems back online. But there's a whole other component to it that's sort of the business continuity planning that includes what humans need to do
Right.
in the event of an emergency. And it would cover the sort of thing like make sure you've trained everybody on how to leave the server room without breaking everything.
Yeah. And we won't spend too much time on this because we actually did a whole episode about it not too long ago. What's an incident response plan? What's a
Mhm.
disaster recovery plan? What's a
Mhm.
business continuity plan? Those are all different things that work together. And if you don't have them and they're not current, hilarity can ensue.
Hilarity in big old scare quotes.
Now
So I
you
I
may
guess you
go.
did eventually get it resolved
Yeah.
once you figured out
So
what had happened.
oh yeah, I mean that's the fun part of the story. The long story short, they pushed the button, all the servers slowly started coming back online. About 15, 20 minutes later, Pico resolved. I think they only resolved half the power, but it was enough because, if the power's out in the city, then your network is probably down anyway because you've got a relay.
Yeah.
But yeah, that was the fun part of the story was just recognizing there are other things that need to go into a DR plan that you might not consider until you actually practice.
That is so true. Okay. So, I mean, I don't have anything quite as catastrophic as somebody turning off all of the power because they hit the wrong button. Although I did ask once in a server room, what is that button for? And it was the one to emergency enable the Halon. And the guy was like, don't push that button.
I have a story about
Why?
that too if we
Because
have
you'll
time.
die. It doesn't. So the Halon systems don't actually trigger right away. That you have a countdown basically before it kicks in for you
Yeah.
to evacuate from the room.
It depends on the system. It's usually like 15 seconds.
Yeah, that was
It
the
can't be a,
case.
it can't be a huge amount of time, otherwise it wouldn't
No,
kill the fire before the fire did unrecoverable damage. But yeah, they
exactly.
don't want the people to be in the room.
Not so much. So it wasn't my. Well, I guess this was technically my very first tech job, and it wasn't disaster recovery per se, but I did end up trapped in New York City during a blackout. That was great. I
Doesn't
was
seem
working
great.
I was working for a major, retail company at the time doing, support for their POS systems, their point of sale systems, and so I was visiting one of the stores on site in New York City in the summer, and it would had to be, like, 2003 or so. So, there was a major rolling power outage across most of the Eastern US. Think it was caused by something that happened in Connecticut? I don't know. It's always Connecticut's fault, whatever it was. And I happened to be in the basement of the building working on the server at the time, and suddenly just every single light in the building and all the power just out. And
Yikes.
then the emergency battery powered lights came on, but there was no UPS for the server or really any of the equipment in the entire store. And of course, this was close enough to 9/11 that my first thought was not, "Oh, it's just a power outage." My first thought was like, "Something catastrophic has just happened."
Yeah, and what's sad is I'm pretty sure that's probably word for word exactly how it went through your head.
Yeah, well, I am lame that way. So I made my way up to the street level and realized that the power was out across the entire city. And because New Yorkers being New Yorkers, somebody had a crank powered radio and they were listening to broadcasts. So I listened in as well, and there was no mention of an attack or anything. So instead, I just spent a night in New York City with no power because my car was in a garage that used an elevator to park your car in the basement.
Ah,
Makes it a little hard to get out.
on the one hand, those are cool.
Yeah,
On the other hand, yeah, they need power.
it actually was fortunate because anybody who tried to get off of Manhattan during the power outage just sat on a bridge or close to a bridge for 9 to 10 hours.
I was gonna say a 700-hour traffic jam.
Yeah. So that's my non-disaster recovery power outage story, but more germane to actual disaster recovery was my subsequent job. I was working for a small company, 200-ish people, and there were 3 of us on the IT staff, and 2 of us did work.
Actually
Somebody's
seems like
gotta
a
be the
pretty high
boss.
ratio.
Yeah. And, they put me in charge of the disaster recovery plan because they had a contract with SunGard to, have some servers available and a tape machine available to do recoveries. And they'd done 2 rounds of DR testing, and both times it had been an absolute disaster. Could not recover a single server within the 16 hours that they were there. It's not good.
No, that's more like a disaster, not recovery.
Uh,
Nailed it.
awesome. And they would joke about how the first thing they tried to do was bring up a domain controller. But, if you're the person who's managed Active Directory for any amount of time, you'll know that there are some key roles that at least that one domain controller in the forest has responsibility for. They're called the FISMO roles.
Oh, that kind of roll. I thought you were talking about like a croissant.
Ooh, that would be good too. That's the sixth FISMO role, the croissant master. Flexible single master operation roles is what they're called. And when you bring up a domain controller from a backup, if it's not the holder of those roles, it tries to find out who the holder is so it can get up to date with whatever's happened with the domain since it was last up. And if it can't do that, it won't do anything. It's like a protective measure. But the other 2 guys that I worked with didn't know that. And so after many, many hours of troubleshooting and trying to figure out what was going on, some guy from SunGard came and he's like, "Well, did you seize the FISMO roles?" And they were like, "The what? Seize the who?"
Who said who to the what now?
Exactly. So the running joke was like, "Did you seize the FISMO roles?" Um, but yeah, so this was like 2004. we were running server 2000 and 2003 for everything, Exchange 2003 for email, and the goal of the recovery was that to bring up a domain controller, a file server, email, and the main application that the company used to get business done. So those were like the modest goals. It took me 6 months of working on this DR plan 3 days a week to
Wow.
actually get it all up and operational because nothing was documented. There were no recovery procedures for anything. And I had to use old server equipment because this was pre-virtual machines, right? So I couldn't just spin up a whole fleet of virtual machines and do my recoveries there. I had to have physical hardware, which was all the older hardware that was like due for retirement to do the recovery on. And Server 2000 and 2003 didn't really like being recovered on different hardware. They got angry about that. So a lot of it was I had to make like driver disks that had all the drivers for this alternate server.
Oh
And
yeah.
then I would have to go into safe mode to manually install the drivers to do the recovery because it was just that period of time. And that's when I also discovered that tape backups aren't always good. But you don't figure out that the tape backup isn't good until you've recovered about half of the data, and then
And it
it
just
just
sort of
fails.
stops. Yeah.
Non-recoverable errors. So I really learned to hate backup exec a lot.
Did I ever
Uh,
tell you the time that somebody tried to reorganize the tapes in the tape library
oh lord. It
by
was like a
hand?
was it a robotic tape library?
I think you know that it was.
The robot knows best.
That wasn't backup exec. I don't remember what program that was.
But yeah, so from that whole process, I developed a deep hatred for tape.
Networker.
Ugh,
I
I'm
look.
sorry.
I told you I'm 100 years old.
But I also learned a metric shit ton about Active Directory and the DNS entries that it requires to function properly. Because the first thing you had to do in the recovery process was seize the FSMA roles and use AdCedit to clean out some of the domain controllers that weren't there and update some DNS records. So when the clients came on, they would actually be able to successfully find a domain controller and authenticate. It was a whole pain in the ass. That's the only thing I could call
So
it, but I did learn a lot.
when you say recover Active Directory,
Mhm.
what does that mean in this instance? Is that just a flat system image that you're reassessing and re IPing and all that?
It's a multi-step process.
Well,
So,
the proper way to do it on Microsoft's website, I think, is 31 steps long.
that seems like not enough, but you're close. So yeah, you would recover the way that Backup Exec did it, and I think other backup software is that it would back up the directory and the actual operating system separately. So you would
Okay.
do a recovery of the operating system, and then you would do a recovery of the NDIS database that actually stored Active Directory. And then you would have to use a combination of the NDIS util and AdCedit to get everything up and running. Because you basically had to tell it that even though the records were old, this was now the official record. So you sort of had to fast forward the database to say, you are now the active copy and the authoritative copy for this domain going
Right.
forward. Because in our case, we only had one site. So it's not like you could replicate from another domain controller. Um, so yeah, it was a lot of steps, and they were none of them were documented at the time. And Microsoft's documentation website in 2004 was not great. So yeah, 6 months later, we went and did our disaster recovery test, and we passed. And then we fired off the confetti cannons, and then we started upgrading everything to 2008, and I had to start all over again. Yay!
Yay! So if we fast, this is probably an unfair question. I don't know how much of this you've been actually sticking with and looking into, but in terms of Active Directory 2025,
Oh, Lord. Okay, sure.
Has anything changed? Like in terms of if you were asked to do a DR plan for Active Directory today,
Well, the first thing I would say is don't have all your domain controllers in a single site.
good start.
So when your disaster recovery site does come online, it can talk to other domain controllers. And you may still have to seize a FSMA role if some of the domain controllers you lost held those roles. But that would be my biggest like piece of advice is just, don't rely on a single site for all of your domain controllers and you're in a better situation. As far as like behind the scenes, the way that Active Directory actually functions, I don't think anything has significantly changed in the way that sites and services works, the DNS records and the FSMA rules. Like all of that is still the same as far as I know. So the recovery process, I think that the backup tools have gotten better at that recovery process, but it's still quite a process.
Yeah, I mean that's something that I'd had noticed over, the past 15, 20 years is people went from this concept of doing either backup to tape or backup to whatever medium offsite that you can then recover more into kind of a hot slash warm standby environment. So theoretically, if your Active Directory was up in this warm standby and it was continuously being updated, it would be more a matter of promoting it rather than having to back it or recover it from a backup.
Exactly. What you're describing is sort of a pilot light setup
Yeah,
where
well,
you
that's
have the minimum number of servers that have key services that you want to stay replicated and keep those up with, moderate amount of cost. And that's the sort of thing you could do with cloud now is just have like two EC2 instances or Azure VMs or whatever running to provide that pilot light and then have your actual disaster recovery site could be in Azure, could be a secondary site, but you can always point up at that Azure deployment or AWS deployment to replicate and authenticate instead of having to recover from scratch.
right. And the downside there is that you pay a little bit each month for an environment that's effectively not helping you at all
Hmm.
from a productivity and revenue generating thing. But if a disaster does occur, then you push a bunch of buttons. I mean, I'm thinking very perfect world here. You push a bunch of buttons. Your supporting systems all pop online. You
Hmm.
swap out some DNS records, and you're back in business.
Yeah, so I mean, one of the later disaster recovery projects that I worked on, and you may have been part of this as well, was for a pharmaceutical company that we
Did
were
it
doing
work?
consulting work for. It did, so you
Okay,
probably
in that
weren't
case, I was
involved.
probably not there. No.
But what we were actually using for disaster recovery was VMware's SRM product, Site Recovery Manager.
Right.
And Site Recovery Manager did site to site replication of your VMware clusters. And so the process of recovering was pretty straightforward because all you had to do was say, bring up these virtual machines, these replicated virtual machines over at the other site and make sure that you update your DNS records. I, I mean, there was more to it than that, but that was essentially the crux of it. And what that meant was you weren't recovering from tape. It wasn't this big, long, drawn out process. And also, it had the capability of recovering into an isolated VLAN, so you could do test recoveries. We called that the bubble.
We
Remember
love
the
the
bubble?
bubble.
While there were some tricky things with SRM, ultimately it was awesome. And I think we were using array-based replication, which meant we were getting really good replication times as well. Instead of using SRM's built-in replication, which was a little bit slower because I think it was doing like snapshot-based replication. This was just doing array to array replication, and so it was really fast. And I think our recovery point objective was like 5 minutes.
Right. And
You'd
you
have
can
5
only
minutes
do
of
that with
loss.
array based.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
could only do that with an array, absolutely. But the two sites were not next to each other, not in the same zip code. They were several
1,700
states
miles
away from
apart.
each other,
Yeah.
sort of thing you'd have to get on a plane. Um, so it was eventually successful, although the tabletop exercises and the early bubble exercises were incredibly frustrating because people kept doing things not in the bubble. Like, God damn it. We try not to bring down production when we're doing a DR test.
Bring down production on your own time. That's called a hobby.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean those are challenges too. When you're running a DR test, it is essential that everybody runs only off of the documentation provided to them and only in the disaster recovery designated area,
Yes.
because otherwise it's not a true test.
Exactly. And it is very hard and expensive to run a full DR test, but there are some major benefits because you'll encounter those things that you didn't plan for
Right.
and figure out workarounds or at the very least update the documentation to go, oh, okay, we actually need to do it this other way because X, Y, and Z. And
Yeah.
we certainly encountered that with some of the virtual machines would not remap their IPs quite right because of the way the applications that were installed were configured. Basically, there were hard coded IPs inside some of the machines. And so we had to account for that as part of the recovery process, even though you would think not that the servers wouldn't have static IPs, but that the remapping of the IPs through the SRM scripts should take care of that. And it did at this operating system level, but it did not at the application level. And hence we had a problem.
Right. And those are, you always tell people you shouldn't have static IPs hard coded into applications.
Yeah. And yet,
But there's
and yet,
that word should.
I think we have time for maybe one more story if you have something.
I mean, I'm trying to think. I do have one that was similar to the SRM model that you were talking about, and I kind of started alluding to it, where it was a customer, and they had this situation where their on-prem environment was their production, and they were
Hmm.
just starting to use the cloud, and they wanted to do sort of a little bit more than a pilot light, but that idea where you've got continuous high availability at the application level, taking care of the replication to a separate site. And the theory with this was everything's consistently updated. It's geographically separated by a responsible amount of distance
Hmm.
into an environment which allegedly will never go down. So it wasn't US East one. What is shit? I can't remember which one we make fun of all the time now. Is it
Oh,
one
it's
or
US
two?
East 1. You were
Yeah.
right. North
I should
Virginia, baby.
I should never doubt myself. But so what they wanted to do was just effectively turn it into a situation where it could be a blue green environment,
Oh, I
right? You've
see.
got
Okay.
production here on prem. You throw a switch, automated things happen, and then all of a sudden production is up in the cloud.
Hmm.
And some of the stuff that they did here was super expensive. One of them was they were running Oracle Rack, already expensive,
Yeah.
with a node here and a node in the cloud, and the commensurate storage costs that go along with that. Obviously, there are better ways to do this. But, this was a few years ago, and people were for a long period of time, people were insistent that the cloud is just another place to run virtual machines.
Yes.
I think that mindset has changed at this point, but it's
It
important
has
to
shifted.
remember, the 2010s, 2008s, that's what people thought.
Yeah.
Other things like PaaS was viewed with suspicion, not with an eye towards opportunity.
Not only that, but I don't think Oracle PaaS was even an available option at that time.
No, if I remember correctly, they were actually violating the rules by running it in a virtual machine, let alone.
Yeah, I was going to say Oracle was real pissy about all of that for a long time until they built their own cloud.
And then
And
they
now
were
you
like,
can run Oracle in the cloud.
everyone should only use Exadata.
Not everybody has just like barrels and barrels of cash.
But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. The point here is that they wanted to have it as smooth of a transition as possible, like literally script out all the little things like you were talking about. Push a button, everything migrates into the cloud.
Hmm.
And they ran a test, and their tests were actually fairly brazen. It was still like, I want to say like 3 a.m. on a Saturday or something. But they didn't do a bubble test. They did a real live test, migrating everything into the cloud.
Wow.
I know. Ironically, they didn't want to do the bubble because they thought the bubble was going to be too much work. So they go through all this stuff. They have all the people on site. They run all of their pre-checks. Everybody's ready to go. They throw the switch. We wait 15 minutes. We try to go to the host name of this particular company, and nothing happens.
Ooh. Okay.
And everybody's like, maybe we have to wait a little bit longer. So we waited a little bit longer. Nothing happened. Now people start to panic a little bit, trying to figure
Yeah.
out what went wrong. We followed all the steps. Well, long story short, they followed all the steps as they were written 3 years ago.
Oh.
Certain applications, they just copy and pasted from old documentation into the new documentation without double checking that things were consistent the way that they used to be. In particular, there was this helper machine that did something, some kind of an essential utility, and I cannot for the life of me remember what it is. It was just absolutely necessary. It was basically a Raspberry Pi. It was like a
Right.
nothing system, but it wasn't part of the plan. So when they went to the production environment in the cloud, little Mr. I think I can was left behind.
Oh, poor
And
baby.
this crucial data transfer or pipeline or whatever the F it was not there. So the application was like, you know what I'm going to do instead? Crash.
Right. Oh dear. Yeah. If you ever find a server that's named like SRV-util01, that is the most important server in your entire fucking company.
You have no idea.
We had a util01 and util02 at that one company I worked for. And some of the stuff that was on there was so business critical and it had no business being all on the same server, but that was pre virtualization.
Right.
So, you only had so many physical servers, and sometimes one server needed to share a whole bunch of stuff, and it just did. Oh, God.
I was talking to a customer recently, actually, and they are a modern company, a gigantic modern company, and they still run some critical services on AS400s and IBM Z mainframes.
Yeah. No, that sounds accurate.
Trying to conversate about disaster recovery there has been entertaining. Some of this
IBM
code
will.
is literally older than some of their interns.
Oh, yeah. No, I believe it. I believe IBM does offer AS400s as a service.
They have the Z Cloud, and that's what this customer is investigating using.
Hmm.
And actually, this is something that has this happened a lot, and we can end with this one because I'm sure you've had this experience too. Um, Customers would looking curiously at the cloud of some kind, eventually wanting to get there, and kind of basically building the disaster recovery plan with the idea that it's actually a migration plan.
Oh, several times.
In fact, I think Azure Migrate started being called Azure Migrate because people just used it to migrate.
Yeah. What was it originally called? Azure Site Recovery, ASR. It was
That's it.
originally
I
called
think that's
Azure
right.
Site
Yeah.
Recovery, and they just renamed it to Azure Migrate because most people, that's what they used it for. Oh my goodness. All right. Well, hopefully, dear listener, you enjoyed Chris and I reminiscing about our days in the trenches of disaster recovery. If you want other episodes like this, let us know. Go to chaoslever.com, fill out the contact form, and if there's another topic you want us to cover of what we've lived through, we are more than happy to do so. Um, in the meantime, hey, thanks for listening or something. I guess you found it worthwhile enough if you made it all the way to the end. So, congratulations to you, dear friend. Now you can go sit on the couch, fire up a DR bubble in Azure, and migrate your physical hardware to there. You've earned it. You can find us on LinkedIn, Chaos Lever. You can go to our website, chaoslever.com. You'll find show notes, blog posts, and general tomfoolery. We'll be back next week to see what fresh hell is upon us. Ta ta for now.
Did I ever tell you about the time that I was helping a company with a merger and acquisition and nobody wanted to change their servers' names? And there was a huge fight between the teams because both teams had a server named Snoopy.